all for joining. We're super excited to have Ms. Kindra presenting for us. She's been such a great asset to our community, and so we're excited to learn all that she has to offer in this hour. So thank you all again for taking an hour to get some learning in. Some quick updates about some events that we're going to be hosting soon. So on May 20th, we're going to be having another virtual event, a lunch and learn event from 12 to 1 with Seth Clark. He's the manager of Marcus Crisis Prevention Program. So that'll be virtual, and we'll have some general CEUs offered for that. On June 9th, we're going to be hosting a happy hour from 6 to 8 p.m. At Austin Beer Works. Just kind of a good time to, in the world of virtual CEUs and everything, we still want to make sure that we have opportunities to connect in person. We don't want to lose that aspect of our organization. So feel free to join us on June 9th for a happy hour, just to mingle, collaborate, and just kind of hang out. And then in August, our very own amazing Amanda Tammy is going to present in August another lunch and learn event too. This time seems to work for a lot of folks. So more information to come on that, but that'll be in August. So feel free to please join all of our events. We've got some good things coming up. So yeah, if you are interested in presenting for us also, feel free to email us at our email address. And we'll be happy to, kind of coordinate something with you. So without further ado, I don't think I'm missing anything. So without further ado, Kindra, the stage is all yours.
All right. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. And I know as we're multitasking, like no pressure to keep cameras on if you want to eat and not show that off. But I'm glad to be presenting virtually and hopefully can capture some of that multitasking time. Our purpose today is to talk about BACB updates for supervision. And so I wanted to see, since we do have a smaller group, I'm going to cover both fieldwork and RBT supervision. But I wanted to know, let's see, there we go. If you guys have a preference on kind of what area is most relevant to you, I can kind of spend more time on either or. But for today, we're going to review the fieldwork supervision changes. In 2027, we have a big standards and requirements change that we need to be prepared for if you are supervising anyone. And so some transition planning guides and resources. Also going to talk about a couple of key fieldwork handbook updates, some definitions that have changed that actually impact the way that we deliver that fieldwork supervision. And then depending on interest, we can also review some of the RBT supervision changes. I know these went into effect at the beginning of 2026, but there's kind of that 2-year transition period. So I'm also happy to spend time, and I have content prepared to kind of review and chat through those. And then ethical implications, because we wanted this to be able to check both boxes as you learn about supervision practices and then the ethical implications. So for those I don't know, Valentina, Andrea, Shannon, Jen, do you guys prefer more information about fieldwork supervision, RBT, or would we like to cover kind of both of those things? And feel free, comments, questions, chats, whatever works for you.
Both would be great.
Awesome. Okay. Sounds good. Well, just a little bit about me. I started my ABA journey kind of by accident in a classroom setting where I really was interested in learning how to teach better to learners that had neurodivergencies and specifically autism. So I did get my master's at UT and studied the developmental disabilities and autism program. And at that time, I really didn't know what a BCBA was. But since then, and since my certification, I've really been through the journey of working in lots of different practice settings, from being an independent provider to working in kind of large scale clinical practices. And now I'm transitioning into more of that consultation model. And I really like to focus on supervision and mentorship and support for BCBAs. So this just is kind of hitting all of my topic interests, which is why I've been keeping a close eye on some of these updates. So hoping to share that with you all. All right. The BACB had this quote that I really thought was appropriate to kick us off. And they define supervised fieldwork where academic learning is going to meet the real world. So we're supposed to provide an experience for our trainees that take what they've learned in their coursework and then apply it to our real life practice settings. And those have usually been varied. So as far as fieldwork supervision, I wanted to know everybody's kind of experience. So is anybody here brand new to fieldwork supervision by chance? Or have not provided that type of supervision before? All right. Are you guys currently supervising fieldwork trainees?
Hey Kindra,
Yes.
the way the screen is set up, we can only see half of it.
Oh,
So you might have
okay.
to change the way
Yeah.
that
Let me see if I can change
you might
that
have to
later.
take your own image off.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Here, let me try to fix that because I was worried that that might come into play. So let me see, share screen.
Oh, Heather maybe it's only on my end. Can everyone
I,
else see all of it?
I could see everything.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
never mind.
Well, let me know. I do want to make sure that you guys are able to see the resources. And then I do have PDFs to send as well. So, is any, I guess my main question here is trying to gauge who is currently providing fieldwork supervision. Anybody? Everybody? Okay, Heather, awesome. All right. And then if you're not providing fieldwork supervision, also curious, or even if you are, I guess both, um, what setting you are primarily in. I know Valentina, you said you're at CTAC. Are others in more clinical practice, in-home, outside of direct practice?
In-home for me, and I'm not providing services. I oversee staff who are overseeing RBTs.
Oh, all right. Okay. Awesome. Thanks for that. All right. So just to get an idea of where we're coming from, come on there. All right. And then I wanted to bring up how familiar are we with those fieldwork supervision standards? There's a lot wrapped up in the handbook and our supervision requirements. And I found that in my journey with trainees, many of them have no idea what they need to do. They just want to start their fieldwork and collect those hours. And that can result in mistakes in documentation or those forms not being completed correctly. And then I think another problem that we're having is that the BACB is implementing some changes, some of them with newsletters and lots of warning, and some in these handbook changes or definition changes that aren't always at the top of our priority list. And so a lot of supervisors are not really fluent with the standards and requirements. This is a resource that the BACB has shared. Let's see. Did that switch over? I'm not able to see my screen. You guys see the BACB? Okay, great. So this is actually a fieldwork self-assessment that's designed for trainees and supervisors so we can evaluate our knowledge. And I encourage you, I won't spend our time doing that today. Maybe we'll just model a couple of questions, but take this because it's a little surprising how some of these requirements can be interpreted differently. And I feel like this is actually the first time the BACB has given some pretty clear black and white answers. So let's start with the poll for number one. If there are some items on that test content, formerly known as the task list, that are not covered during supervision and field work, is that a problem? And otherwise, do we have to provide that comprehensive supervision experience with the task list? Yes or no? Or it's okay if you don't know. So this one actually we don't have to cover everything, right? Our goal is to incorporate as much as we can, but we want to make sure that we're focusing on that application, right? Their coursework should prepare them, and we're not trying to help them study for the exam. We're trying to help their competencies and skills. All right. If someone receives more group supervision than individual supervision, can they adjust their hours and still count that month? Remember, we've got that 50-50 requirement. So if you go over on group, can you make an adjustment? How do you report that? This is something that they actually did provide some clear guidance on, how to adjust prorated months and things like that. One of the main requirements that is in place is that you cannot prorate or offer any fieldwork supervision without that client observation component. Okay, I'm going to switch back to my slides now. Did that switch back for you guys as well on the main view? Okay, great. Thank you. But again, I encourage you and your trainees to look at some of these, preferably before you start your supervision experience and have that contract in place. But it can really help avoid some of those problems in understanding and interpreting requirements. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about changes to the standards. The big changes coming at the end of this year when we change our fieldwork requirements. We are now in the 6th edition task list, and that won't change, but there are some pretty significant changes to the fieldwork setup. So this kind of is a table that the BACB shared in their transition document that goes over some of the changes. And this is the new kind of standards requirement. Some things that I will highlight is for concentrated. Now you only have to have 7.5% supervision. You still get the 1,500 hours. And then the maximum has been increased to 160 hours. So that's closer to those that are working kind of more full time. But remember, we still have to balance those restricted and unrestricted. Another big change is the observations with trainees. Formerly, there was no, or currently, there's no duration requirement. We just have to make sure that happens at least once per supervision month or contact period. Now we actually have to track the duration of client contacts for each supervision contact, and that's on the new MVF form as well. So again, these are some of the kind of pre or current standards, and then some of our changes that are upcoming. Another notable change is that there's no longer a minimum number of contacts per month. So you could do supervision kind of all in one larger block or contact. Again, we have those increased maximum hours, which can help our trainees. We, as well as trainees, have to be more specific about documenting when we're doing observation. And there are some changes to what counts as an observation. We can't bring a trainee into a session and talk to them about what another RBT is doing. It does need to be kind of that active contact where they're interacting with the client or they're interacting with the RBT that is servicing the client while we're supervising. So again, the self-assessment has some good information about some of those changes. I think the biggest thing that I want to point out is that even though this doesn't go in effect until January of 2027, if you're providing fieldwork supervision now and your trainee is not going to be able to complete all requirements and apply by the end of this year, they need to start meeting new standards now. All of those hours, even prior to 26, 27, have to meet these current requirements after January 1st, 2027. So a lot of trainees that are in progress right now, we need to make sure that we're either looking at those previously completed months and ensuring that specifically the observation durations are correct. And then the BACB does recommend completing another set of MVF forms. So there's kind of a long-term implementation timeline that they have shared. And then what's coming up next, which is currently hidden by my screen, is that in 2032, which seems like a long way away, there's only going to be one pathway eligible for BACB certification. So I do think that some of these changes that we're seeing now and some of the handbook changes are kind of preparing our field for a bigger and different shift in field work that's more aligned with like a practicum than kind of our loosey-goosey standards we've been operating in. So, lots that you have to pay attention to kind of get some of these smaller changes and updates. The BACB newsletters are really critical, but I don't know how much you guys enjoy reading this, but they're not always topic relevant for everything, right? And sometimes these really important things are buried like midway through. So I encourage you, your organization, and your trainees to read the newsletters, to talk about them when they come out, and to keep updated with the documentation that the BACB is putting out. I do have a resource page at the end and tried to capture some things that I think are critical for sharing with you guys. Any questions?
I have a question about people that can't sign up in time for January 1st, and we've been signing their monthly verification forms.
Yep.
Um, do we need to re-sign anything?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay.
And so that's kind of what I was going to go over next is talking through, there's also some educational requirements. So in addition to what you're doing with your trainees, you also have to make sure that they are aware that there are some educational changes. So if they completed their coursework pre-2026, they might not have been taking the new pathway eligible VCS course sequence. So just kind of keeping an eye on that as well. And just knowing that you have to meet all requirements if you're not going to apply before 2027, including these educational. So that's one thing I would not have your trainees wait on to get their degree kind of verified and make sure that they do have all the educational requirements. And then Heather, I also see you have a question. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
thanks.
Sure.
Just to confirm, so if we have trainees right now who will test in 2027 or after, can they cannot start accruing up to 160 hours a month until January 1st?
Yeah, that's another weird part, and the BACB is not really clear on this. So I would recommend sticking with the 130 max for now, and just making sure that your supervision percentages are in place.
Okay.
You will have to have your 2026 signed form or the 22 standards as well as a 27 form. So you're going to actually, the trainee will turn in or have documentation for both sets. And I'll explain some of those differences as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's kind of wacky, and I wish that there was a clearer path for this, but thank you for the questions because it helps me understand where those things are kind of missing. So we have to complete, if we're going to be testing and applying under these standards, all requirements before the end of 2026, which I'm telling trainees they should probably finish their hours by end of October, give themselves that November month to get their application materials available and submit. Something to note is that if your trainee is like right at the cusp and they are ready to submit their app, but they don't feel ready to test, that's okay. As long as your application is approved in 2026, you're good to go. You'll test 6th edition and you've met all those requirements. You actually have 2 years from the time your application's approved before you take that exam. Okay. Again, verify those coursework documents are very important. There's a new OBM course that's like 50% longer than anything we would have had to take in terms of supervision. And now some of the courses have standalone requirements, meaning we might have taken them kind of packaged together, and now they have to be taken separately with separate content focuses. So a couple little idiosyncrasies there. So again, if your 20, 25, 26 hours are going to need to meet the new requirements, you have to have proof and documentation of those observation minutes and duration. If you're working providing supervision to RBTs directly in your practice setting, hopefully this is not a problem because you're providing most of your supervision with clients present. But for those of us that maybe don't provide all of our supervision with the clients present, this could present some challenges in kind of backdating those forms. And so you do have to use the new MVFs, which I'll show you the final verification form since this is kind of the important one. But you'll see that you do have to list for supervised or concentrated these duration minutes of independent hours, supervision hours. And so it's a little bit different. On the monthly verification form, and remember, you'll have to have these in case of audit and keep them for the 7 years. This one does have fieldwork includes hours and minutes of client observation. And remember, it's 60 minutes for the standard and 90 minutes for concentrated. Does that make sense? What's not on these forms and what has never been on our forms are restricted and unrestricted hours. So it is important that we are keeping track of those. And so I'm going to put that as our first code word is actually going to be unrestricted because I do believe that that is the most difficult type of fieldwork supervision for our trainees to acquire. And it does mean that they have to have some specific time that they're not providing direct services to clients in order to cultivate those skills. And I know that can be a challenge in a lot of the clinic or practice-based settings because those hours aren't necessarily billable, and that's difficult to plan for. Okay, if you're wondering, when will my trainee finish their hours? How many hours do they need to do so that they're not like on the edge of this timeline? I made something for you guys. This is a Google Sheet, and with that link or with the QR code, which I'll go back to you in just a second, this is kind of my version of a completion estimation. Show you a couple things. When the month changes, you need to change this number to make the formulas work. So let's pretend that we're looking ahead to May. This would be where we enter how many hours your trainee currently has. So let's say they're at 850, and then it should work some magic and tell you, even if they hit their max of 130, oof, this person's not going to finish in time with their standard field work. Okay. There's another tab down here. Again, you'd have to change your date number at the top if you're looking for that concentrated ratio. It's a little bit trickier, but this is that 10%. So looking at our current standards. So go back to our, let's say somebody's a little bit closer. They've completed 1,000 hours. Oof. They're still pretty close to that deadline, right? And you have to do a little bit of math to see the carryover because sometimes you can complete at the beginning of this month and sometimes just to get to that magic 2,000 number and that 60-40 split of restricted, unrestricted, you have to work a little harder. Okay, so let me go back to the slides. Oops. Maybe. Nope. Sorry, y'all. Okay. There we go. So if you would like to utilize that tool for your trainees, you can use this QR code or you can always email me and I'll make a copy of that available for you. Again, it's not an official BACB document, so do your own calculations, but something a little easier if you did want to kind of help plan that transition for your current trainees. Okay, Valentina, Heather, are you feeling more confident with those transition questions?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Okay. The transition document that the BACB has is also very helpful for some of those questions. Okay, now I'm going to talk about some of the changes that are not in newsletters to the handbook. First, in December, they changed on page 17 our acceptable and unacceptable activities, adding specifically that podcasts are no longer accepted as unrestricted. and then role playing or any procedures that are not client related. They also slipped in a clause that all of your fieldwork activities, restricted and unrestricted, have to relate to a current and specific client. So this is different. I know in my past supervision, we would do case studies and maybe role play or talk about clients that I had worked in with in the past that had specific needs in order to broaden the scope of supervision. And that's no longer permissible, unfortunately. So the BACB is kind of narrowing what we're able to approve as our restricted and unrestricted activities. And this is important to make sure that your trainees are not counting hours unrestricted out of work that are didactic learning or studying. And I think this can be unfortunate because I think sometimes we do need those more specific skill sets. So sometimes we have to get creative. Let's say they found a great webinar or a training about feeding therapy, and one of their client has some feeding issues, but they're not doing a feeding program yet. Maybe we could have them draft some goals specific for that client or look at different research on methods that we could propose to parents, right? So we can still do projects that aren't specifically implemented, but they do have to be client related and specific. All right. This one is newer and is not annotated in the changes in the handbook section. But the BACB has now been more specific in how they define appropriate clients for supervision and fieldwork candidates. We've always had the can't be related, can't live together, can't be a primary caregiver. But now there are some specific requirements about how the trainee and the supervisor and the client's relationship is defined. So to kind of emphasize those more, these are our three options. Consent is always required, but you can either be employed by the same organization as your fieldwork trainee. You can have a separate client contract, the trainee, the supervisor, and the client. Or you can have an organizational contractual relationship with the provider or the organization where the client's receiving services. This is a big change. I've been supervising people remotely at different clinics and in schools and in different settings that aren't always related to early intervention or ASD. And now the BACB is saying that we have to have more of a specific client-facing relationship, similar to the standards for RBT supervision. Most of you, I'm assuming, probably work in the same settings as your trainees, which is beneficial, means you don't really have to do anything differently. But for those of you that don't, you might have to change some of your practices to ensure that you do meet all of these regulatory requirements. Does anybody feel like they'll fall into this kind of middle category where they need a separate service contract or consent beyond what? Yeah, Tammy, Amanda, sorry, your last name shows up. So, go ahead.
Kindra, I was going to ask, can you speak a little bit more to the fourth point, the consent required? Like, what would that look like to attain consent?
Yeah, and I actually have some examples for you guys. So, this is something that I realized when I worked for a larger organization, they didn't really do specifically. Consent was kind of wrapped into the service agreement. But the BACB is recommending that when we select our clients to focus on for field work, their caregivers or the client themselves provide consent and assent to be a part of your fieldwork experience. Now, because we do have more observation requirements, let's say that the fieldwork coordinator or supervisor is not the client supervising BCBA, right? They work at the same organization, but I'm not programming for that client. I would need consent to be a part of their treatment. So I do have some examples. This also, I think, is really important, especially if you're not in a clinical practice or a practice where you're seeing your coworkers frequently, impacting home settings specifically. Sometimes we need to record some of those sessions in home in order to meet those supervision requirements, or maybe we want the RBT to watch their performance and take data on their behaviors. We need consent to take those videos or to take different measures or observations that aren't a part of the client's behavior service treatment plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and just to clarify, so would we need to just state outright to the caregivers that, hey, this person is a trainee, they're going to need to use your that, and then that's what we need to attain?
Correct.
Got
And
it. Okay.
I think it's possible to work that into your organizational form so that every
Right.
client gives that consent. But I feel like consent needs to be more informed and more specific. That's how I interpret it. And I think that that's best practice, right? To be open about the purpose of that consent.
For sure. Okay, thank you. That makes sense.
Sure, sure. All right, good questions. And then let me see if I can click back to. All right, so if you are wondering, how can I cover all of those bases and make sure that I have a sample contract? These are the BACB's supervision contracts that they offer. None of this says anything about consent or client participation. So I again, have a gift for you guys. This is my version of a client supervision service contract. It reviews the specific consent permissions that I described, as well as the purpose of the agreement. This is very specific that we're meeting BACB requirements, but I'm providing supervision to the trainee, not case management. And so I think this is really required if you are supervising other people's clients. Like Shannon, I don't know if this would apply to you, if you are doing that kind of fieldwork contact for other organizations. But I've designed this to kind of protect the supervisor for not having that professional kind of responsibility for the client's programming reports, data analysis, but saying that they do need to frame that into their supervision and field work. And that it is client specific. Also, if you want to kind of briefly describe what things we're going to be working on with that client in field work, might be more specific or it could be more exhaustive. But this goes through, I'm sorry?
Can I ask a question before you move
Yes,
on?
go ahead.
So with it being client specific, our program is focused in short term. So the list of clients is going to change every 6 to 9 months. And so
Yep.
we have to update this every time there's a change to their caseload.
That's what the BACB is telling us.
Wow.
And they're saying too that if your caseload is shifting, you need to identify. And I'm having to do this with some of my trainees that work in school settings where they have a classroom and they might have multiple classrooms and multiple students. Let's say, okay, for this 9-month period, let's focus on a specific fieldwork client. You still have your other clients and you still have your other short-term turnovers, but like somebody who's doing tier 3 behavior intervention plans. These aren't SPED students. We're trying to get them out of behavior intervention quickly. And yes, if that's related to their field work, they do have to have that client-specific arrangement. It represents a big change. It's something that, again, saying let's not take this lightly, but also the BACB kind of snuck it in, which it's not my favorite.
Can I ask one more
Yes,
question?
please, please.
To see if I understand it correctly, if we're in a clinical setting, could we potentially, upon onboarding a client, have them sign this consent agreement that, during their time at our clinic, we will be providing supervision for students and not like have it be like signed for each client coming in and not have to rotate it on when their teams change and whatnot?
Yeah. I can't give that really kind of specific guidance since I'm not affiliated with the BACB. This is how I'm interpreting these kind of changes and requirements. So it does come with that kind of caveat of doing my best to inform, but honestly, I found out about this last month. So I'm still kind of scrambling because I provide remote supervision to people all over and all different types of settings. And so it is a big change. I would
Okay.
encourage you, if you do have questions about kind of the organization's responsibility, the ABA Ethics Hotline is a wonderful resource. Dr. Yulima Cruz is kind of their head of supervision, and she will send you a personalized reply. Again, not BACB affiliated, but there is some guidance there.
Okay, thank you.
I also encourage you guys to message the BACB about this. This is something that we didn't get a newsletter or an update. Like I said, that change, this language here is not even in the handbook like annotations and updates log. So it's a little sneaky, but something that we're still responsible for. Okay, so if you would like to see that supervision resource, that contract that covers kind of the client as well, again, that's something that I've created. It's not BACB official, but hopefully it could be helpful. Okay. Other questions before we kind of move on to more RBT related? Okay. Again, just stressing that all of our field work has to be client specific. We're not doing general learning activities anymore. And again, that really impacts our unrestricted focus for our fieldwork trainees. Okay, questions, comments, concerns? We'll also go through some scenarios at the end, time pending, okay? All right. Now on to RBT supervision. Do you guys all supervise RBTs currently, mostly? Okay. And then is anybody here their organization's RBT supervision coordinator? That's a different role. Okay, so knowing the differences in roles, whether you're acting as an individual supervisor, an organizational supervisor, or that coordinator, is an important distinction. Who here has done a competency assessment for an RBT, that initial? Good, good. Okay. Now, honest question, who here individually tracks RBT supervision hours? Not your company does it, but you do it on your own as a BCBA. We need to, okay? This is something that's commonly missed. And a lot of us assume that our organization is tracking that there's the RBT binder and log. We also have to have records of that if we are an attesting supervisor. So if your organization or company handles all that, still be informed, still have copies of those forms, and still make sure that you are documenting according to our ethical code. Okay. Are you guys feeling pretty confident with the RBT supervision requirements and these changes coming up? Are you like, wait, what? There's more changes? All right, so that's going to bring us to moving into a direction of RBT supervision. We did have the change at the beginning of this year so that we have different training standards, exam content, and that maintenance requirement. The first change is the 40-hour curriculum has been updated with some new requirements and curriculum outlines. This does mean that you have to spend specific time on specific areas and can't just generally train your RBTs. And of course, we do have to have trainers that are qualified to train and supervise. So for those in attendance, I'm curious who uses more of a online module or a training package for RBTs in their organization? All right, who does their own original curriculum and supervision training or RBT training for their employees? Do you guys have a do-it-yourself 40-hour training? Or are your RBTs doing that on their own before they get hired? So usually the three kind of scenarios that we find. And I think that how our RBTs are trained really does matter. So before we get to statistics on how RBTs are trained and how that impacts their progress, there is also a change to the initial competency assessment. It's some definitions based about who can assess. It's most important, I think, to keep in mind the organizational role that all everybody that participates in your RBTs, certification and competency, has to be employed by your organization. So if you're outsourcing training, that might not work with our new standards. The RBT test and content is now with their third edition test content outline. It has expanded the number of tasks, and this is kind of giving us more of a specific focus for what we're looking for in that competency assessment and how to prepare them for the test. One thing that I did want to point out is that there is some data that suggests that not all RBT training programs are created equally. And so the BACB, this is from 2022, but it is their last kind of review of data. Pass rates are going down, just like they are for the BACB exam, which should be concerning to us, and we should try to be remediating that with better training. This actually tells us, based on what training provider does the training, what their pass rates are. Central Reach is on here. I know that's a big one that a lot of people use, or Relias also on here. But their pass rates are high, but not nearly as high as some of the more individualized training programs. So just something to keep in mind. That can definitely impact performance, not only on that exam and competency assessment, but rolling over into their professional performance. I think the biggest change, and the one that still has us scratching our heads a little bit, is the recertification process. So it used to be every recertification, we'd redo that competency assessment and we'd just kind of keep rolling on with our RBTs. Now recertification actually is a 2-year cycle, and our RBTs don't have another annual competency assessment. Instead, they need to have professional development units. So that's our second code word, is PDU. These new PDUs are distinct from BCBA CEUs, and that they're really RBT focused. And so we'll talk a little bit about any of those professional development units. Has anybody here with their organization started thinking about how that will work within your company? Some people plan to outsource training, some people plan to do in-house training, and so we'll go over just a couple of modes for that. Because of the 2-year window, there's like some RBTs that are going to be stuck in this weird in-between phase and not really recertify for like more like 3 years. But their BACB portal account should have information about what their specific requirements are. It's a good way to answer those questions. Okay, also, how do we get these professional development units? So within that 2-year cycle, they have to have 6 PDUs, or sorry, 6 per year, 12 total to recertify. And PDUs can come from 3 different kind of sources. You can do an in-service training within your organization, same organization that is employing the RBT. You can send your RBTs or have them attend professional development events offered by ACE providers like myself, but they can't be CEU events. They have to be PDU events. And then for any RBTs that want to take any university coursework, they can count some of their coursework for those PDUs as well. And there's kind of a guide to how to convert those hours. So some things to note. I think most people are opting for more of the employer or organization-led in-services. These have to be active learning, right? We have to actually be doing things, not just lecturing our RBTs. So we do want to have some role players, some activities to observe. If you are going to give your RBTs the ability to seek out their own ACE provider training, it does have to be approved for RBTs, and it can't just be one of the general BACB CEUs that we might be interested in. So that's something to note, that those standard CEUs won't count for PDUs. And PDUs cannot be earned for a client-specific training. Like, I can't do a thorough BIP review with 5 people on my team and count that for a PDU. It has to be separate. And then if someone is taking coursework, the BACB has a guide for ensuring that it's taught by a BACB, and then the grades and then the hours conversion. We also have to track PDUs for all of our RBTs, so there are some resources available for that. These are some potential topics for PDU training, more related to the 3rd edition test content. These are more considered technical skills and things, you know, to kind of improve and enhance the RBT competencies above that just initial familiarity with these areas. And then a lot of RBTs that have been surveyed actually prefer this kind of quality over content and learning more outside of what they're doing in their RBT sessions, but learning some of the bigger kind of issues impacting our field and professionalism, like cultural humility or compassionate care or caregiver education, assent-based treatment. And again, we want to make sure that we are individualizing these. So I would recommend not just having your RBTs select their own PDUs, but making sure that you're connecting them to meaningful learning outcomes. Okay, questions about that? Any questions about RBT specific things? I know we're getting close to the end of our time together, and was going to switch over to a little bit of ethics.
Sorry, I did have a question about PTUs. How do they enter this? I saw that they enter it on the BACB, but how do we create codes if we're doing the employer-led and service route? How do we go about doing that?
They don't have a lot of information about what all is required if it is employer-led. There is more information in the ACE provider handbook about those kind of generally offered PDUs. But it would be similar to creating an in-house kind of training log, similar to RBT supervision, where you're recording who attended, what the topic was, how long it was, and then what kind of content was covered. They will all be learning. I don't think that they've gotten into like, oh, some have to be ethics and some have to be in different areas. It's just kind of general at this point. And then similar to how we enter in our CEUs on the BACB portal, RBTs also will have to do that and able to be eligible to recertify. Does that help? Hopefully. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. And I'll point out as we wrap up some of the resources that I'm including that you guys, to point you in the right direction for more information. Okay, so in terms of how this impacts our core ethical standards, we know that we want to really make sure that we are doing supervision in order to benefit both our clients and our trainees. Also making sure that we're leading with compassion and integrity. And then most importantly, competence. And this is something that I think we really have to not only evaluate individually, but also within our organization. Who's competent to be a supervisor? Being a fieldwork supervisor is very different from an RBT supervisor. And not everybody really gets motivated to go above and beyond for that. So I think it's about competence as well as motivation. Also keeping track of your supervisory volume, whether that's RBTs or trainees or BACBs, the ACBAs. We want to make sure that that's not taking away our ability to service our clients and provide a really meaningful supervision and training impact for our trainees. And then, like I said, the accountability and documentation are really important. I think it's important that we emphasize to all the BCBAs that we work with that we need to know the changes in standards and make sure that we are adhering to them and documenting appropriately. So some of the common ethical dilemmas with RBTs, and these are just some suggestions based on prior experience. And these can be also used in terms of PDU training if you develop to address any kind of common issues that you see in your practice. So a lot of times there's that kind of power differential between BCBAs, supervisors, trainees, RBTs, clients and caregivers. And so the nature of that relationship can often create some ethical dilemmas. Multiple relationships, kind of going beyond that supervisory role when you get too close or become friends or start to rely on each other for favors or outside of behavior analytic duties. The scope of competence and training, I think this is specifically important for RBTs. We have to know what their competence is, and we shouldn't be pairing them with clients or procedures that are outside of that competence unless we are able to provide that increased supervisory content. And then making sure that we are maintaining integrity in our data and reporting. It's not okay to just guesstimate how many supervision hours or check the box that we got 5% even though we were not close. And so it's part of that kind of integrity and honesty in our data collection and reporting that can sometimes be an issue if we don't have systems in place. Another I think source of some of these ethical dilemmas can be between the relationship of the clients, providers, and the caregivers or related stakeholders. And I know this can be especially impactful in home settings where multiple relationships start to exist between the RBT or the trainee and the clients and caregivers. And there's not information shared with the BACB about all concerns. Gift giving and boundaries is always something that comes up. And then confidentiality in social media. That has been something that there have been an increased number of violations reported. And so it's really important that we educate our RBTs and our families about how to avoid some of those things. Right. Again, fieldwork supervision is much more complex, and we are really the gatekeepers for our profession. So I think it's really important that we make sure we have time, that we're documenting, that we're taking data, and that we don't avoid those difficult conversations about trainees' competence or areas of need. And so I'm not going to go through all of these today because you can read the review. There's 2 research articles in the notes that talk about some of our common issues. But the most common issue is not classifying hours appropriately. That restricted and unrestricted can really be difficult for people to discriminate. Also, as we already addressed that supervisory volume and capacity, we really need to make sure that we're checking ourselves and our trainees to make sure that the hours assigned to them, the hours they're completing are meaningful. And then making sure that we have documentation and contact really clearly defined so there's not errors in our MVFs or that documentation that we do have to keep about each supervision contact. I've heard of a lot of gatekeeping issues or feedback or power differentials where BCBAs are not signing forms because of a personal difference, not because of lack of professional skills. And so this is definitely a dilemma in our field. And if you guys have experienced that in your own practice or have trainees, maybe from a previous work environment that report those things, it's really important that we give them the right tools to advocate for themselves and also report any clear violations to the BACB. And then multiple relationships. I think it's easy to have that role blurred with the fieldwork trainee because you do work very closely with them. Remember that we always just want to be professional mentors. That can involve having a relationship that's compassionate and goes outside of the workplace, but keeping those boundaries in place and knowing how to manage conflicts if they do arise is really critical. So if you're interested in that, these are some really great resources from the BACB about kind of the ethics code and some of those ethical issues or ways to deal with some of those common dilemmas. All right, we've got a couple of minutes for questions, and then I will share with you guys the resource pages for reference so that you guys can educate yourselves further. Also, please feel free to email me. All of the QR code links for resources will direct you to fill out a short survey so that I can follow up with you as needed. Okay?
And I don't know
Can you give the
if
second
we
code word?
missed if
Yes, it was PDU for Professional Development Unit. Sorry.
And I think We have some folks who missed the first one. Uh-oh.
I'm so sorry, I did miss the first one.
Okay,
That was a really good presentation. Thank you so much.
thanks, Jen. I appreciate you joining.
Thank you
Heather,
so much.
did you have a question?
I really just had a comment. I wanted to say this is, I don't know about anyone else. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed with
Yeah.
all of the things that, we need to do, but this is obviously critical and we have to do them. So
Yeah.
it's good to have all of that information. So I just wanted to say thanks. I feel like this was really, really informative.
I'm glad to
And I
hear.
really appreciate your input.
I mean, this is it, like I said, it's a passion for me. It's also, a professional kind of concern because I spend a lot of time delivering supervision, trying to close that gap for people that don't receive all of their hours within their organization. Like they need some more unrestricted support, or they work in a school or a setting that doesn't have a BCBA. So it's really going to impact some of those trainees significantly. And I think that that's unfortunate. All right, one more thing. I was going to share my resource pages.
I also think there's something in the chat, Kindra, a question for you.
I was
Sure,
going to
sure.
ask.
I will take a peek at that. Let me put these up. These are resources, including some great research articles about survey results recommendations, as well as some good advice for supervision. And then these are the resources that are BACB specific. So those will be in notes as well. All right. Let me stop sharing so I can see the chat. Okay. All right. Let's see. Questions. Code words, you got the code words. Okay, we got that one. I hope you guys like the resources. That self-assessment, I've been trying to make one of those for my trainees for a while. And Andrea, you say that you guys do your own kind of in-house training at CTAC. That's awesome. Yeah, I know that you guys have a lot more specifics in terms of your training protocols. All right. And then trainees testing in 2027 beyond, yes, they will need both MVFs. So you have to keep your current. If you're taking that, doing those now, you can start using 2027 forms whenever you want. But if you didn't have them for previously completed months, you do have to have both. So you will need a new form if they're audited.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else, guys, gals?
Will you be sending these via email, the resources?
Yeah, so I provided a PDF kind of notes page for ATX ABA to share with everybody afterwards. And then I
Beautiful.
can
Okay.
also, yeah, if you guys want me to send those QR codes as well, they will be in the slides, but I can send them separately if you're
Okay.
wanting like the estimation calculator.
That was wonderful. Yes, please.
Also have a self-assessment based on the test content that I wouldn't mind sharing and throwing out there. So I'll put together a resource page that you guys should be able to access.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks so much, Kendra. This was great. And we'll share those resources with y'all by the end of next week. We just want to, make sure we get all of our documentation and stuff ready. But yeah, we'll provide those to you as quickly as possible, but deadline of next Friday. So not this tomorrow, but 2 days
anything
from
that you guys
whatever.
are missing, please email me as well if you had an individual question. I'm happy to talk offline about anything more specific. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Kendra. Thanks, y'all.
See ya.